beautiful. So you have come to help me, have you? Well, no one can do that, mademoiselle.
This is Mike Price, author of the Forgotten Horrors series of movie history books, continuing with our survey of Hammer Films' Dracula series and its essential presences, Christopher Lee and the director-cinematographer team of Terence Fisher and Jack Asher. From their collaborative triumph of 1958, Dracula, or Horror of Dracula as it played in the United States, Fisher and Asher managed a prompt sequel, The Brides of Dracula, in 1960. An effective continuation despite the absence of Christopher Lee from the title role. There is no title role, for that matter, the so-called Brides of Dracula serving merely a figurative purpose to describe a victim or lesser descendant of Count Dracula and his presumably virginal recruits to the cult of vampirism. We would be remiss not to mention the continued involvement of Jimmy Sangster, the screenwriter, who had in 1958 defined a very British countryside setting within the Middle European territory of Dracula. For the sequel, Sangster and a procession of rewrite collaborators narrowed the interest to the baronial fiefdom of Baron Meinster, played by David Peel. Meinster, a captive vampire, resides under house arrest. His gaunt mother, Martita Hunt, supplies the creature with nubile victims. The townspeople, Meinster's tenants, presume him insane, if not outright defunct.
I'll go and get you some coffee.
You see, there's been a death in the village. Tan's daughter. Such a beautiful girl. She was found dead in the forest. They're holding the wake through there now.
How did she die?
Well, no one really knows, but she's dead all right.
The film's fast and loose ethnic and geographical bearings imply a Romanian setting, while applying to the principal villain a Nederlander surname, Meinster, and retaining Peter Cushing's proper Englishness for his recurring role as the vampire hunter Van Helsing. The overriding Hammer atmosphere binds the ingrained contradictions into a coherent whole, unified by Fisher's confident direction and Asher's detailed, conscious camera placements.
And I know I shall have to do whatever hideous thing he asks me to.
There is one release.
The story finds Frenchwoman Marianne Danielle, played by Yvonne Monlar, stranded at a village inn while traveling to a teaching assignment. The conniving Baroness Meinster offers Marianne lodging at the castle. There, the shackled Baron informs Marianne that his mother has hijacked his royal rights. Marianne frees the Baron, who promptly sets out to make up for lost time. The Baroness becomes an early victim, her reward for having kept the Baron more or less imprisoned.
You needn't be afraid, she's dead.
Van Helsing, summoned by a priest, Fred Johnson, hastens to a confrontation with the Baron, imperiling himself in the process. The conflict between Peter Cushing and David Peel is less evenly matched than that of Cushing versus Christopher Lee, what with Peel's Meinster being the type to fight dirty, as opposed to Lee's implicitly regal bearing. Chris Lee had left David Peel some mighty big shoes to fill, not to suggest that Christopher Lee had big feet or any such thing.
We can both love him, my darling. He's up at the old mill now. We can go there together. Come with me.
The very absence of Christopher Lee attests to his essential contributions to the Hammer franchise. Lee had nixed the sequel for himself, being leery of typecasting. David Peel makes an inadequate substitute for Lee in the lead vampire role, although Peel does manage a ferocious presence, however lacking in Lee's air of tragic nobility. By 1960, Peel was scarcely remembered for a handful of small parts pictures of the 1940s, and although Hammer gave him the star treatment with The Brides of Dracula, Peel ended his acting career that same year with a low-billed role in Hammer's The Hands of Orlac. Peter Cushing carries on admirably as Van Helsing, nearly succumbing to the vampire's bite but thinking fast enough to cauterize the wound, the film's most excruciating moment. Frida Jackson provides the more memorable vampire portrayal, who assists the Baron with his predatory campaign. Likewise for Andre Melly, as a schoolhouse confidant who falls prey but retains conscience enough to betray the risen Baron's hiding place. Meanwhile, Yvonne Monlar seems suitably helpless under the circumstances.
Beautiful, isn't she? What a pity such beauty must fade. Unless we preserve it. She's going to join us, Doctor, and you are going to watch her initiation.
In the greater scheme of Hammer Films' emerging dominance as a horror picture factory, The Brides of Dracula may appear an opportunistic trifle, a hastening to reinforce the momentum that the studio had gained with its revisionist Frankenstein and Dracula productions of 1957 and 1958. On its own terms, The Brides of Dracula is a significant refinement of the combined pictorial and narrative styles, an exercise in visual splendor that would help to drive Hammer to a dominant position into the 1970s. Nor was that influence confined to its narrow genre. The dominant art film producers of the 1990s, Ismail Merchant and James Ivory, often hailed the Hammer style as influential on the tone and texture of their period piece dramas, such as Howard's End and The Remains of the Day from 1992-1993. Box office returns on The Brides of Dracula fell short of expectations, a disappointment that the studio laid to the absence of Christopher Lee. Negotiations persisted between Hammer and Lee. They remained involved in other projects, until that definitive Dracula player agreed to resume the role some 5 years later. Which is to say, Christopher Lee would charge back into character with 1965's Dracula, Prince of Darkness. And we will be catching up presently with that splendid job of sequelizing. Until then, this is Mike Price, signing off.
Don't look at his eyes. Marianne, look at me!